The office lights hummed faintly, their sterile glow casting long shadows against the polished floor. For months, the numbers hadn't made sense. At first, it was small, missing invoices, a vendor payment delayed, a discrepancy in the accounts that could be explained away with a clerical error. But the mistakes kept piling up, each one brushing against the edge of suspicion until the pattern was too sharp to ignore. Behind the spreadsheets and reports, there was a hidden rhythm, a thread woven deliberately to hide the truth. Jonathan had trusted Daniel for years. They had built their firm from a small consultancy run out of a rented room into a thriving business with dozens of employees and clients who believed in their integrity. Jonathan had always handled operations, while Daniel oversaw finances and negotiations. It seemed like a perfect partnership. Jonathan's discipline balanced Daniel's charm, and Daniel's vision complemented Jonathan's caution. Together, they had weathered market downturns, sleepless nights, and risky contracts. Jonathan had once said Daniel was like a brother. That made the unraveling even worse. The first real crack appeared when a longtime client called Jonathan directly, asking about a project that, according to Daniel, had been settled months ago. The payment had been made, the contract closed, the books balanced. But the client insisted that invoices had gone unpaid, that reminders had been sent with no reply. Jonathan's stomach tightened as he promised to look into it. The following morning, he combed through the files himself, bypassing Daniel's usual summaries. What he found was a hollow ledger, entries shuffled, dates adjusted, payments redirected. It wasn't sloppiness. It was deliberate. Confrontation would have been too easy, too emotional. Jonathan knew Daniel could talk his way out of anything. Instead, he began watching quietly, retracing the trails hidden in bank statements and false vendors. He stayed late in the office when the building was empty, copying documents onto a hidden drive, scanning signatures that looked too familiar, too practiced. Each discovery was like a blade twisting deeper into his chest. The man he had trusted, the man he had celebrated victories with, was siphoning off their success piece by piece. Weeks passed, and Jonathan's silence became its own weapon. He didn't reveal what he knew, not yet. Instead, he built his case carefully, waiting for Daniel to dig himself deeper. Every forged invoice, every shell company, every account in distant banks became evidence, proof of betrayal stacked against years of friendship. The hardest part was playing along, smiling in meetings, shaking hands with clients, pretending the world hadn't shifted under his feet. At night, he sat awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if Daniel had ever seen him as more than a pawn, a convenience to be discarded once he had taken enough. The breaking point came one Friday evening. Jonathan walked into the office to find Daniel pouring whiskey into 2 glasses, his grin wide, his voice warm. He spoke of a new deal, a chance to expand overseas, the future shining with possibility. Jonathan stared at him, glass in hand, and felt only the weight of lies pressing against his chest. He nodded, smiled, and clinked glasses, but inside, the decision had already been made. By the following week, Jonathan had delivered everything, files, statements, proof, to the board and the authorities. The fallout was immediate. Daniel's charm crumbled under the weight of undeniable evidence. Employees who once admired him looked away in disgust. Clients severed ties. The empire they had built together collapsed, but not before Daniel's name was dragged through every headline, every courtroom whisper. Jonathan didn't feel victorious. He felt hollow. The office no longer felt like a place of ambition or hope. It felt like a mausoleum for trust. Jonathan stayed late again, but not to uncover lies, only to pack away the remnants of a partnership that had once been everything to him. Betrayal, he realized, was not just about money or contracts. It was about the theft of belief, the shattering of loyalty. Exposing Daniel hadn't given him satisfaction. It had only revealed how fragile even the strongest bonds could be when greed poisoned the foundation. The company would survive, rebuilt with new hands and new faces, but Jonathan knew something in him had been permanently altered. Trust would never come as easily again. The betrayal had been ultimate, not because it destroyed their business, but because it destroyed the idea that loyalty could withstand ambition. The nights grew longer after the betrayal was out in the open. Jonathan found himself haunted not only by the facts, but by the memories. He remembered the first time he and Daniel had signed a contract together, the ink fresh on the paper, both of them laughing over cheap coffee in a corner cafe. They had promised each other loyalty, a pact between dreamers trying to carve out a space in a world that didn't care if they succeeded or failed. That memory burned brighter than the spreadsheets, but now it was stained with the knowledge of what had followed. The trial loomed like a storm cloud. Daniel's lawyers argued, twisted, and tried to weaken Jonathan's testimony, but the evidence was too overwhelming. Each day in court was a reminder of how thoroughly Daniel had betrayed him, not with a single act of greed, but with years of calculated deception. Jonathan had sat across from him in meetings, celebrated holidays with him, even trusted him with family dinners. All while Daniel had been carving out his escape route, fattening secret accounts, smiling as he quietly dismantled everything they had built. Colleagues whispered when Jonathan walked through the office halls. Some pitied him, others admired him for standing his ground, but all of them knew the weight he carried. In private, Jonathan wrestled with the question that never left his mind. Why? It wasn't as though Daniel had been desperate. They had been successful, comfortable, respected. But greed rarely respects boundaries. Daniel had wanted more: control, power, perhaps even the satisfaction of believing he was the smarter one, the indispensable partner who could outwit anyone, even Jonathan. One night, months after the dust of court battles had settled, Jonathan sat alone in his office, the city glowing beyond the glass windows. The firm was smaller now, rebuilt from ashes. Trust had been reshaped, redistributed, never again invested in one man's hands. But as he sat in silence, Jonathan realized the betrayal had left scars far deeper than financial wounds. It had changed the way he looked at people. Smiles seemed thinner, promises more fragile, every handshake a question mark rather than a bond. And yet he was still standing. Daniel's downfall had made headlines, his name now synonymous with treachery and fraud. Jonathan had walked away with his integrity intact, though his faith in friendship had been shattered. In that lonely office, he finally admitted to himself that the ultimate betrayal was not about money or contracts. It was about love, about trust, about believing someone was family only to discover you had been a stepping stone in their pursuit of power. The story of Daniel's cheating would fade from public memory eventually, replaced by newer scandals and fresher tragedies. But for Jonathan, it would never fade. It had become part of him, a permanent reminder that even the closest bonds could rot from within. He would rebuild, stronger this time, with walls higher and doors locked tighter. He would succeed again, but not with the same open-hearted faith. That had been stolen, and there was no getting it back. And so, the man who once built dreams with another learned to build alone. Wiser, harder, unyielding. The ultimate betrayal had reshaped him, not into a victim, but into a survivor who would never again mistake loyalty for blind trust. The city never slept, and neither did Jonathan in those restless months that followed. Sleep came in fragments, broken by images of Daniel's easy grin, the sound of his laughter echoing in memory. Sometimes, Jonathan woke in a cold sweat, convinced for a moment that none of it had happened, that Daniel was still his partner, still his friend, still the man who had shared dreams over long nights of planning and impossible deadlines. But then the silence of the house reminded him of the truth, and the bitterness seeped back in. The rebuilding of the company was grueling. Every contract that Jonathan once would have handed off to Daniel now came across his own desk. He scrutinized each number, every clause, unwilling to let anyone hold that kind of power unchecked ever again. The weight was heavy, but it was also clarifying. He had been forced to see what blind trust had cost him, and he vowed never to be blind again. Daniel's downfall was swift but spectacular. The newspapers branded him a fraud, television stations replayed his mugshot on evening broadcasts, and the once charming negotiator became a case study in betrayal. The investors he had courted with honeyed words turned against him, distancing themselves as if proximity alone might poison them. Jonathan followed none of it directly, though the reports always found their way to him. There was no satisfaction in watching a man unravel, only a grim finality. In quieter moments, Jonathan allowed himself to remember the beginning. The cheap desks, the peeling paint in their first office, the way they had promised each other that failure was not an option. He remembered Daniel sitting across from him, sleeves rolled up, eyes burning with ambition. That man, the man Jonathan had believed in, was the one he mourned. The man Daniel became, the liar and thief, felt like a stranger wearing the same face. People often told Jonathan he had done the right thing, that he had shown courage exposing Daniel. But courage wasn't what he felt. What he felt was loss, like a wound that refused to close. The betrayal hadn't just stolen money, it had stolen time, trust, and the belief that loyalty could endure. He wondered if Daniel ever thought about what he had thrown away, or if greed had swallowed even that awareness. Months turned into years, and the firm found its footing again. New partners joined, carefully chosen, their roles divided with strict boundaries. The company thrived, leaner but more resilient. Jonathan became known not just as a businessman, but as a man who had stared betrayal in the face and refused to be broken by it. But at night, when the world quieted, he still felt the ghost of what had been. Perhaps the cruelest truth of all was that Jonathan still missed Daniel, not the man who betrayed him, but the partner he thought he had, the brother he believed in. That was the ultimate betrayal. Not the theft, not the fraud, not the humiliation, but the shattering of something rare and human. Trust, once broken, never returned in the same form. It came back jagged, edged, cautious. And so Jonathan carried on, building a life out of what was left, determined to succeed without illusions. He knew now that betrayal could come dressed as friendship, that the knife could come not from an enemy, but from someone who once swore loyalty. The knowledge hardened him, sharpened him, but it also left him lonelier than he had ever been. In the end, Daniel had taken more than money. He had taken the innocence of belief. Jonathan would never give that away again.